Survivor TV. She's a Staten Island girl who loves her family and is just happy to still be here to tell her story.
And 5, 3, 2, 1, set.
Welcome to Survivor TV. I'm Tamika Felder, and we're here with Tricia Pagano, who truly is a survivor. I want to talk about a quote that you used when talking about your story previously to me. You said, "What I have lost is nothing compared to what I have gained." And that really resonated with me. What did you mean by that?
Well, when I was diagnosed with cervical cancer, it was at a very young age. I was living the life that I had always dreamed of. And then upon my diagnosis, realized how very fortunate I truly was to have good health up until that point, a loving, supportive husband, and 2 healthy, great kids.
And your kids were really young when you were diagnosed.
They were. Juliana had just turned 4 and Jason was 18 months old. So it was very challenging when you're planning on having a bigger family to deal with something like cervical cancer at that point in time.
So how did your diagnosis affect them?
Well, I think at the time it didn't affect them at all. You know, thankfully with my personal situation, I had 2 surgeries and that got all the cancer. So I didn't have to undergo radiation or chemo or be on any medication that would have altered our way of life or the way they saw their mother. So I think at that point in time, it was okay. But in the last 5 years, we've had the good fortune to be involved with Tamika and Friends and a lot of other advocacy and support related events and experiences that have exposed them to my situation back in 2008. And while I don't think at their current ages they will truly understand what cervical cancer means and has meant to our family, I think they're starting to realize that this was something that changed our family, but we found a way to make the best of it.
So how did you actually tell your children that you had cancer?
The topic comes up when they ask why we don't have any more children, why they don't have any more brothers and sisters, versus let's sit down and have a talk about HPV and cervical cancer. You know, they still are very young, and so that would go completely over their heads. But I think that the way that they ask those questions causes a lot of emotion in both my husband and I. And so when we talk about it, we talk about how cervical cancer was a life-changing experience. You know, they do know what cancer is. You know, unfortunately, we have had other members in our family that have had other types of cancer that are not here any longer. So they have some understanding of cancer and disease, but know that mine was different, and that for them, it meant not having a bigger family.
You know, talking about cervical cancer is hard, especially because it's linked to HPV. How did you deal with the stigma of HPV?
You know, I said once when asked that question, I graduated right to cervical cancer. So I unfortunately didn't even have time to worry about HPV. When I was diagnosed with cervical cancer, they said, "Oh yeah, and you have HPV." So at that point, you know, I kind of knew a little bit about it because I knew so many women that had it, but yet I was the one with cervical cancer. So now, in retrospect, and now going out and having conversations with people about having HPV and cervical cancer, now I see it, you know, how people kind of get a little bit uncomfortable about the conversation, the details, the level of intimacy that a woman might want to talk about because I've been through it. I think that has been very eye-opening for me, but I said before, you know, there is nothing more uncomfortable than laying on an operating table about to have your life changed. So talking about HPV and STDs is really nothing to me.
And that's why I always say that having cervical cancer is hard, but preventing it, it's the easy thing because we have all the tools. But I also want to know, what advice would you give to other women who have young children who are diagnosed with cervical cancer to help them, you know, because there's going to be a mom out there who's watching this, who's looking at you for inspiration, who's just been diagnosed with cervical cancer. And she has these young babies at home that she's thinking about. What advice would you give that young mom?
Having a young family is hard, no matter what, when you have a cold. So when you have something serious like cervical cancer, I think it depends on the individual situation. I think it depends on who's there to help you, if you have to go for doctor's visits and treatments. I think one of the things that I realized while I was in it and living it is that you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. You need to take a deep breath. You need to have one or two trusted people that can help you either hold your house down and do your laundry and take care of your kids and
You have to have help.
shuffle them, but at the same time then you need that person or two to come to appointments and ask questions to the doctor that you might not be thinking of, and take notes, because when you're a mom you tend to be a multitasker and you have so many things going through your head and so many things to put down on your calendar. So when you're in that situation with a young family or even with a not so young family, you definitely need to, as much as you don't want to, reach out and get that support from your spouse or your family or friends or neighbors, because it definitely helped me in those first few weeks figure out what I was going to do next.
The bottom line is you can't do it alone.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Thank you so much for sharing your survivor story, because you're definitely a survivor and an inspiration to us all. That's all the time we have for this edition of Survivor TV. Be sure to log on to our website, survivor.org, to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. And we'll see you next time for the next episode of Survivor TV.